Right. So the next section of the discussion, we're going to enter into cross-examination. So I believe Jay will be examining Dr. Ali first. This is a 10-minute section, so I just have to adjust the timer.
Okay. You stated when you were talking about the doctrine of Tanzi that God is not like creatures, that God's transcendence is not compromised because the Quran is a representation of God's thoughts, which is interesting because I had mentioned the divine ideas. But isn't that kind of the whole issue here? I mean, if the Quran is a created text, it's a representation, that's an icon or an image of divine thoughts. How is that reconcilable with God being not like anything created?
Well, Jay, I've used the analogy with my own thoughts being represented in writing. What I put into writing is not me. That's just an expression of my thought. So if something is analogous like this with God, where God gives us his thoughts in writing, that writing itself is not God. It's only a representation of his thought. I don't understand the philosophy behind it.
So analogia is based on some degree of similarity. It may not be univocal or absolutely equated, but it's related to the idea of some notion of similarity. But Surah 42 says that God is in no way like creatures.
That God is not what?
No, in no way like creatures.
Okay, well, that's exactly a point at which I would pick up and say that the real point of that, it says that God is nothing like his creatures, is to not equate anything on earth or that flies in the sky or anything that we know to be creatures with God. God is unique, he's transcendent, and he can communicate with us in the form of the Quran or mentally, but that communication itself is not God. It's just a representation of the thoughts of God. And
So
I
it's
do
an
not see
image.
any
So is it an icon or an image, a symbol?
Well, no, but when you say icon, then I think of images and physical representations.
So the Quran's not the words of the Quran, and the Quran's not a physical representation of these thoughts of Allah.
If you want to press it that way, then Muslims would say that the same you can say about the Torah. The Torah then too would be a representation of the thoughts of God, and the words of Jesus.
Yeah, but I'm arguing with your theology, not Judaism.
Yeah, in my, I have not, Jay, I have not, and I've confessed this already, I have not studied the philosophy behind this deeply. I know that Muslim scholars have debated these issues, but to me, it is a dead issue. It is a debate that belongs to the Middle Ages and the thought patterns of the Muslim philosophers of that time. I don't see any difficulty saying that the Quran is a representation of the thoughts of God. Or that, more simply put, that it is a divine communication similar to what was given to previous prophets. The Quran itself said, we have revealed to you, the Prophet Muhammad, as we have revealed to prophets before you, Noah and others.
Are the thoughts distinct?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Jay.
Are the thoughts in the mind of Allah distinct or not really?
I don't know if I need to make that kind of distinction. Again, Muslim
are there any distinctions in
make that
Allah?
Distinction?
Are there any real distinctions in Allah?
Between the names and between the divine essence? But I don't feel the need to make that distinction. And I don't think that trying to probe that distinction is going to help us to understand why Christians are proclaiming that there is.
Right, because the reason I'm going in that direction is that because the reason that you don't believe in the deity of Christ and the Trinity, ultimately, I would argue, is because of our philosophical assumptions about who God is, what unity is, and to what degree there are distinctions at that higher level or not. So I think it's absolutely a fair question to ask you whether the attributes or the thoughts or whatever are real distinctions or not. I mean, you can ask me all those questions, and you're saying I can't ask you those things.
Well, you can ask, but I don't necessarily have to answer, and my refusal to answer.
Well, I thought you were here to defend the unity of God.
let me finish that thought. So my refusal to answer would not be a capitulation to accepting the Trinity. Let me point out that our Jewish friends would have presumably the same problem that you are thinking that Muslims should have.
Sure.
And yet our Jewish friends have not seen the necessity to adopt the Trinity doctrine into their religion.
How is that relevant?
Monotheists. It is relevant. How is that relevant? Because it shows that Jews who have been abiding by the Old Testament and who would presumably have a similar problem.
Yeah, but you believe the texts were corrupted by the Jews.
But that's a different point, Jay.
No, it's not because so it's arbitrary. It's ad hoc. You pick when you want to take the Jewish stuff and then when you want to reject it. Now you're trying to argue from the Jewish text.
What I'm saying here, Jay, is that if we say that the Quran flowing from the mind of God must somehow be an icon for God, and therefore we would have, in a way, something like two divine persons here,
I didn't make that argument.
Then we would have to say the same thing, even for the theoretical Torah that is
But I didn't make that argument.
So, but Jews would never go that route, and Muslims don't have to go that route. It doesn't matter
what route Jews go, though.
And Jay, Christians did not go that route until first they started to accept Jesus as a divine person, which in its day was a very common thing for people to do, to accept a human being as God. And then they tried to come up with a philosophical justification for having done this. And as part of that justification, they eventually arrived at the doctrine of the Trinity.
So the Jews corrupted the text when you need to look at the text being corrupted by the Jews. But then when you want to refer to the Old Testament as authentic and a genuine revelation of monotheism that you want, that's fine. And then you ask me all these questions about the Trinity. But if I ask the same questions about the Islamic doctrine of essence and attributes, you say I don't have to answer those questions. Well, to me, I think that, I mean, you don't have to, you're right, but I mean, how are you avoiding the question? By the way, I didn't say that because there are real distinctions that proves that that if the Quran in the eternal sense, the eternal Quran is somehow distinct from God, that means that I'm arguing that proves the second person. I believe that the personhood and the distinctions in God are on the basis of revelation. They're not on the basis of speculations. It's what's revealed. And so we take all of these texts as a whole, right? And we look at them and we see what the whole body of these texts revealed. And by the way, the next point I wanted to make was that you're assuming that God can't reveal more and more of himself over time. I mean, your own theology argues that God reveals more and more of himself over time, with the Quran being the final capstone that corrects, the previous mistakes and errors of the religion. So there's no reason why in our system I can't say the same thing. Well, God has chosen to gradually unveil more and more and more of himself. Even the Jews, you want to refer to the Jews, all right, well, even in Jewish religion, they had the notion that Yahweh gradually unveils more and more of himself, right? Isaiah knew way more than Abraham knew. So there's all these ad hoc assumptions that you have that are not consistent with the presentation of the Quran itself, which I argued that I put out in my first statement. The question there is, where is the Levitical ceremonies? Where is all the stuff in Exodus relating to the priesthood, to the altar? Where is all of that in Islam? How is there continuity, if you want to argue that you have the continuity?
1 minute 30.
Okay, so Jay, now you have shifted the subject to continuity. The question is not whether Islam is
continuous. I can ask you whatever I want in this.
But let me answer your question.
I can shift in this question.
Islam is continuous, and if we ask about discontinuity, Christianity is discontinuous. For example, even talk about the sacrifice.
No, that wasn't my question. My question was where in Islam is the continuity, not where in my position.
You're asking a lot of questions, but
I can ask. This is my interrogation of you. Where in Islam is the continuity?
But interrogation doesn't mean that you answer your own questions.
You're telling
so many questions.
I'll be glad. I already answered you the continuity of where the temple and all that liturgy and all that is in our religion. I'm asking you, where is it in your theology? You can't then turn that around and say that's shifting the blame.
I'm not asking you anything. I'm telling you about this continuity. There is continuity, and you're asking, am I saying that God cannot reveal more and more of himself? No, quite the contrary. I'm asking you that well, I'm not asking you now, but my point in my presentation was to say that if God is a Trinity, that should have been known from the very start. This is not one of the things that God would hide about himself.
That's avoiding the very thing. Where is...
I didn't. You're not letting me answer, my friend. Okay, you
because
called me into
you're avoiding the question.
Have an equal engagement.
You're going
right?
back to the question because I asked you. Now I can move on.
So now I'm trying to clarify what you just spoke about. All right. So you're attributing to me that I'm saying that God cannot reveal more and more of Himself, and what I'm clarifying that what I'm saying is that yes, God can reveal more and more of Himself, but not something so essential as the number of persons contained within His being.
When you're ready, Dr. Early, we'll do. Is this agreeable terms?
Sure.
Yep. All right. Cool. Well, when you went to start your examination, that's when we'll do it.
I'm ready.
I'll start the time when you are.
Jay, in the New Testament, clearly Jesus has a God. So in John's Gospel, he says, I'm ascending to my Father and your Father, my God and your God. So who is the God of Jesus?
The person of the Father.
Okay. So does the Father have a God?
No.
Okay. So in what sense then is Jesus and the Father equal if one has a God and the other one doesn't?
By sharing the same nature that the Father communicates to the Son.
Okay. Now, Christians, I understand, pray to the Father. Do they also pray to the Son?
Yes.
Do they also pray to the Holy Spirit?
Absolutely.
How many Holy Spirits are there?
One.
Why does the book of Revelation speak of 7 spirits?
Because they are energies of God.
They are?
Energies of God.
Energies, did you say?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I wasn't sure I heard you right. Okay, so how many of these energies does God have?
They're infinite.
Infinite. So there's an infinite number of spirits.
No, the spirits is a phrase that's used to describe different attributes or powers or actions of God. In our view.
All right. So, but these various spirits are not separate persons in the Godhead.
Correct.
Okay. So there are only 3 persons in the Godhead.
Correct.
So when you ask me about the Quran and you ask me about the various aspects of God and whether there is a unity or a simplicity or how God is at that level, how do you reconcile these various spirits with the idea that there is only one God?
Because as I said, they're energies. So they're attributes, just like in Isaiah 11. We have the different attributes or powers that the Messiah possesses when he speaks of the spirit of knowledge, the spirit of wisdom, etc. We just see those as different actions or attributes of God.
Okay. Now, we all understand that Christians are not claiming that Jesus became God when he was born of Mary. He was God from all eternity, if indeed he was God. From all eternity, was he a spirit being?
I'm not sure what you mean by spirit being, but he was the second person of the Godhead. He was a divine person from all eternity, yes.
So he wasn't flesh. Was
Correct.
He spirit?
If by spirit you mean divine nature, possessing the same nature as the Father, yes.
Okay. So if the Father and the Son are distinct, and each one is a spirit, then we must have had 2 spirits.
No, spirit there is representing for us nature, or usia, or essence.
So then there were 2 natures.
No, because we'd make a distinction between nature and person.
So there's a distinction between nature and person, but no distinction between nature and spirit.
Again, if in that analogy or that explication that you gave, we would understand spirit to represent the usia or the essence there.
Okay, so there were not 2 spirits, but there was, or were there 2 spirits?
Again, this is equivocation on the sense of the word. This is the word concept fallacy.
Okay.
So when Jesus talks to the woman at the well, he says God is spirit, right? He's talking about the Father. He's not saying the Father is the Holy Spirit. He's saying that God in his essence or nature is spirit in the sense of being a divine nature that's beyond created reality.
How do you know at that point that he was referring to God the Father and he wasn't referring to God the Holy Spirit?
Well, it's possible that he could have been, but I think most of the time, most exegetes will make the point that you made, that most of the time Jesus is saying and directing the worship to the person of the Father.
Okay. And by the same extension, perhaps the answer is already given, but I'd like to hear it from you. How do you know he didn't mean the Trinity is a spirit?
Well, again, if by spirit you mean representation of the divine nature, then he does.
So when he was speaking to the woman at the well, you're saying that when he said God is spirit and you should worship God in spirit and truth, then he was telling the woman you should worship the Trinity because the Trinity is a spirit.
It's implied there, but I don't think that just because every time that the word Trinity is not mentioned that it's not. I mean, for example, in our view, if Jesus says, "I came at the behest of the Father," just because the Father and the Son are mentioned, it doesn't. We don't necessarily assume that. Oh, well, then the Spirit's not there. In other words, sometimes words can encompass a totality, or sometimes they can pick out a particular. Just depends on the context. But even within that verse, there's a distinction between, in our view, two notions of spirit there. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit. So we don't worship in the essence of God. That's not possible. But God himself, in his nature, is spiritual.
Yes, and so now we're at the point where the Father is obviously a spirit, according to what you've explained. The Holy Spirit, by definition, must be a spirit, and the Son is also a spirit, but you're saying in one sense. And yet the three share the same nature. But why call them three spirits if you don't mean that they are three spirits? You said that different connotations of words. Right. I get that. But why is it that they're always designated as a spirit like this? That the Holy Spirit is always a spirit. It's never like, the nature of God is here with us today, or the nature of God is now within the Christians. It's always like the
I see what you're saying. Right. So in our theology, what happens is that eventually the explication of the person of the Spirit, right, when we call him the Holy Spirit, that's not identical to saying that God is Spirit. Again, it's two different uses of the term. That's why when this is debated by Basil and the Cappadocians, they explicate that the two different ways that we distinguish Son and Spirit are not on the basis of the term Spirit, but rather on their origin. So the Son is an eternally generated hypostasis of the Father. The Spirit is an eternally proceeding hypostasis from the Father alone. That's Orthodox theology.
Yeah. So now, with this in mind, so you should worship God in spirit. I understand from some Christians that they say we worship the Father, but we worship the Father in the Holy Spirit. But that doesn't seem to be your expression, because I asked you, do you worship the Holy Spirit? And you say, I think you said yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, no, what I said was that we don't worship in the essence of God. That's not possible. That's why we believe in the essence energy distinction, which in our view means that there are real distinctions in God, not just between Father, Son, and Spirit, but also between the diverse actions, the manifold ad extra operations or activities of God. So in our view, the question that you had asked before is, are there real distinctions? How do you not have the same problems that you're putting on you? We believe that we avoid those problems precisely because we think there is a distinction between God's essence and his operations or energies. And that distinction is predicated on a more fundamental distinction between the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. They don't do different actions. It's all one action and energy by the triad, but it's manifested in different means and modes and ways.
Okay, so now, when the Son died on the cross, according to the Gospels, when the Son died on the cross, was that the second person of the Holy Trinity dying, or only the human aspect of this person?
Correct. So the second person of the Godhead assumed human nature and willed to undergo death in the human nature. So the severing of the human soul from the human body, in our view, is the thing that Christ willed to undergo. So he did undergo it in his singular divine hypostasis, as he's a divine person. But what he underwent was the severing of his human soul from his human body, and hence the Pauline and patristic teaching of Christ descending in his human soul. He's still, the divine person is still the person to that human soul, into the realm of Hades to preach to the Old Testament saints.
So I'm going to be sure I understand you, Jay. Did the human Christ have within him two souls, one human and one divine?
we don't believe that God in his divinity has a soul. Soul is a property only of human created nature. God has the divine essence, and he possessed the divine essence, but he underwent no change in terms of his divine essence. He only underwent that death and change in terms of alteration of nature in the humanity that he assumed.
Are you, I know you've studied the philosophy, so you can educate me on this. Are you taking the view of dualism, that human beings have a soul that comes into them, or do you have the idea that the soul is somehow the human mind that is connected to the human brain?
Our view is that body, mind, soul, and will are all faculties of human nature, and they're all instantiated in the particular human hypostases or persons. So I'm the particular person, Jay. You're the particular person, Shabir. What we share is a common human nature, but we particularize or instantiate that nature in a unique way. We think that, according to the Eastern Fathers, is an analogy for the Trinity, but obviously not a one-to-one correspondence, because the mode of being that creatures have as distinct, separate, discrete beings is obviously not the mode of being that the Trinity has, because the Trinity is a unity. So they always indwell one another. They were never apart. There's no spatial relations in God or anything like that. There's no composition, but humans are composed.
Yeah. I don't know how much more time we have for this.
That is time.
Yeah, okay.